Welcome to Class 6, the final class of the Heart Sutra online study course. And this week, I'd like to pick up where we left off from Class 5 with some discussion of these these sentences from the Sutra. So, without hindrance, the sentence begins, without hindrance, there is no fear. Far beyond all inverted views, one or a bodhisattva, an awakening being, realizes nirvana. So as I spoke about last time, we can receive this as a description of a result. So when an awakening being is willing to relinquish or see completely through the walls of the mind or the obstacles of the mind or the hindrance of the mind, then fear does not arise, because that is an experience of a vastness and a boundlessness and a connectedness that leaves no room for fear. And that is a certain kind of clarity, or it leads to a kind of clarity about the true nature of our experience, about the mechanics, if you would like to call it that, of how the principles of reality are working. Which in and of itself, that clarity is a relinquishment of the so-called inverted views, or the viparyasa or vipallasa, the distortions, distorted views, upside down, literally upside down thinking. And that very absence of fear and absence of delusion is itself nirvana. That is how we define nirvana. And another way to receive this pair of phrases is to receive them as practice instruction, to receive them as meditation instruction. So in that case, I might think of this as an exhortation or a suggestion to work to become free of the hindrances. So the obstacles of the mind, or the walls of the mind more generally speaking, or specifically the 5 hindrances as they are defined in many Buddhist traditions. Those would be sensual desire, aversion, restlessness and worry, sloth and torpor, and doubt. Those are the 5. So restlessness and worry is one. Those two go together. Sloth and torpor, those are words that are not very frequently used in modern English, American English parlance. Sloth is a kind of sluggishness of the mind, of the body, and torpor, the kind of sluggishness of the mind, I think, if I have them right. So working to become this, we might see this sentence as a suggestion or an instruction to become free of the hindrances. How? By turning the mind toward wholesome view, toward right view, toward practice, or potentially by seeing the negative side of things, by seeing how harmful or how insubstantial or arbitrary or unreliable those views are. They're really beginning to understand why they are hindrances. And then there is working to arouse fearlessness. That's another instruction that we might receive from these phrases. So developing a courage to face very directly what is present in this mind and body, in the environment around us. Working toward a courage that enables us to loosen our grip on our views, on even views about practice, for example, to begin to see them as empty as well, as conditioned and in nature, as mere perspectives that we add to our experience in order to try to organize it or understand it or have a sense of coming closer to it. And we might understand this as an instruction to work on investigating our real lived experience. Is it really the way we think it is? Or are we seeing it in some way? Are we thinking about it in some way that's not true to the reality of the conditions that are present? Is it really as permanent, as beautiful, as pleasing, as substantial, as continuous even, as we think it is? Does it really define a self in the way that we think it does? These might be some of the ways that we would investigate our views. Working to open the mind, working to be able to feel comfortable with a kind of boundlessness, with a kind of vastness that may be quite unfamiliar. This requires a certain kind of courage as well, the courage to shed your personal sense of separation, perhaps, or your personal sense of being ultimately in full 100% control. And then finally, opening the heart, opening the mind to accept the possibility of a peace that you've never experienced before. One thing that is very common to the human experience is a way of thinking that things are not going to change. Things have been this way my entire life, and that means they will continue to be this way. But that kind of thinking isn't open enough to allow the experience of nirvana, to allow the experience of practice to transform this mind and this body. So can we find that acceptance, that openness, that willingness to entertain a possibility of something that is present and yet not within our consciousness yet, our conscious awareness. So the next sentence is, all Buddhas of the past, the present, and the future rely on prajna paramita and attain Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. That's one translation of it. If we go to Thich Nhat Hanh's translation, he says, all Buddhas, by practicing the insight that brings us to the other shore, that's his, again, a reminder that that's his translation for Prajna Paramita, or the highest wisdom, or the wisdom beyond wisdom. He calls it the insight that brings us to the other shore. All Buddhas, by practicing this Prajna Paramita, are capable of attaining authentic, perfect enlightenment. So this is interesting. Sometimes people find this confusing, that we start to talk about attainment again in this line. And we start to talk about time, past, present, and future, again in this line, as real, as experienced by even a Buddha. And so again, this is pointing us at not interpreting the previous statements in the sutra, where it says no attainment, to mean the negation of that, but rather it means the emptiness or the conditionality or the interconnectedness of that, woven into the fabric of reality. So this statement, all Buddhas of past, present, and future, can rely on the highest wisdom and awaken, realize awakening. So it's an encouragement. It's an encouragement for bodhisattvas and an encouragement for Sariputta to continue to the end of the path. To the end of the path. To the point in the path where you know fully what has been set down. You know very clearly the reality that you have seen, touched, experienced. And to be sure, this all Buddhas is not new to the Mahayana. I think many people have been brought up to think that way. But even Shakyamuni Buddha himself, according to the records that we have, seems to have said that, acknowledged that he was one of, in a succession of Buddhas, that there were Buddhas that had come before him, and there would be Buddhas who would come after him. He seemed to have been very clear about that. And so, again, this is an encouragement to all of us to really engage in this practice, to know that. And what do we mean by Buddhas? Probably is a good thing to say a little bit about that. So, of course, Buddha with a capital B can mean, often does mean, the historical personage, the person who came into the world and was given the name Siddhartha Gautama and was the son of Suddhodana and Maya, and became an ascetic and eventually awakened, and was thereafter known, referred to himself prior to his awakening as a bodhisattva, and after his awakening as the Tathagata, the one who comes thus, as the way that he most often referred to himself. But he is known as the Tathagata, and he's also known as the Buddha. Buddha means awake, an awake one. So that's one understanding of this word Buddha, is the historical person. And we might also begin to understand the word Buddha as any being that has become aware of its own harmonious integration into the nature of reality. Any being that is aware of the nature of reality, that is harmonious with the nature of reality in a conscious way. And so it is all of our potential, I would say not even potential, all of us have the full capacity to realize the same awakening as the Buddha. He himself said that. But also, if we understand the Buddha as someone who awakens to reality, and we live in that same reality that the Buddha awoke to, then by definition, we are also capable of experiencing that. And finally, we come to the mantra. So then we come to the part of the sutra in which the sutra says, know that Prajnaparamita, the highest wisdom, is a great mantra. And then, and has the power to put an end to all kinds of suffering. This is Thich Nhat Hanh's translation. And then the mantra itself. Gatte, gatte, para gatte, parasam gatte, bodhi svaha. Beautiful. So what is a mantra? What does this word mean? So roughly speaking, a mantra is a syllable or a sound or a series of sounds that is intended to evoke a spiritual state or a particular transcendent mental state. That is the purpose. You could say that is a mantra. And there are certain kinds of mantras that cannot be translated. They are sounds, but they are not sounds in a language or some kind of sequence that has a literal meaning that can be discerned. So a good example of that kind of a mantra is referred to as a dharani. And folks in this class who are Zen practitioners or who have heard of Zen teachings might know that there are quite a few different dharanis that are part of the regular ritual repertoire, if you will, for the morning ceremonies and the evening ceremonies in Zen temples. So we have, for example, the Sho Saimyo Kichijo Dharani, which is for removing hindrance. We have the Dai Hishin Dharani, a very well-known Dharani, which is often used. It's the Great Compassionate Dharani. So it's often used in everyday type ceremonies, but it's also associated with memorial ceremonies, the Daishin Dharani. So in any event, there are various kinds of mantras whose literal meaning cannot be discerned. And then there are other kinds of mantras, ones that do seem to have a literal meaning, that do seem to be in a discernible language, human language. And that can be therefore translated into other languages. And in the case of the Heart Sutra, that is the kind of mantra that we have received. It is a mantra that has a discernible meaning in Sanskrit in particular. And again, so gatte, gatte means gone, gone. Gatte means gone. And paragatte means gone beyond. And parasangate means gone completely beyond. And bodhi is awakening, as in bodhisattva, which we have been talking about all throughout this course. Awakening, bodhi. And svaha. Svaha is an exclamation, like, yeah, like right on. Yes, svaha. So, gone. Gone, gone. So I would propose that when we think about this mantra, that the question is not so much gone where, but what is gone. Not so much who is gone, but what is gone. And clearly, as I said a moment ago, it seems that it would be a reasonable interpretation to say it's not gone beyond awakening. That's not the meaning of this particular sequence of terms. otherwise it would be contradicting the previous statement, which is that Buddhas do realize awakening, do attain Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, absolute, complete, perfect awakening. So what is gone? That's a very good question. Perhaps some limited views or some delusion, perhaps some sense of separation or permanence, perhaps some aspect of the sense of self. What is gone? For the practitioner that practices the highest wisdom, for the practitioner that sees, experiences this teaching of the Heart Sutra, what is gone? I would suggest that for the practitioner that truly, deeply experiences the insight of the Heart Sutra, the idea that merely compiling a series of understandings or a series of mental states will solve my fundamental problem is gone. That kind of check the box Buddhism is gone. Because the sutra has been telling us over and over again that while we may be able to understand the world in terms of frameworks, that is also conditional. Those understandings are conditional. Those frameworks are conditional. The one who practices that way is conditional, is interconnected, is empty. And I would also suggest that merely dividing the world or my mind into categories and understanding that as the path to awakening is also gone. We see those categories for what they are, which is a skillful means. It's not to say that they're completely useless. The sutra is not throwing out all of this as impossible or meaningless, but simply to say that we see them for what they are. We see them for a skillful means, for a methodology, not the thing itself. We see them as the finger pointing at the moon, not the moon itself, but the finger. And we don't get caught up in looking at the finger and dissecting the finger and then investigating the finger and reifying the finger. We realize that the thing we want to understand, see, is the moon. And that the moon illuminates the finger. So perhaps also two things that are gone are the sense that nothing exists, or the view of complete negation. The sutra is a complete negation of all Buddhist principles, or all early Buddhist principles, or Sariputta's understanding of Buddhist principles. Or we might also see that what is gone is the sense of nihilism, right? And we might also understand or begin to experience that what is gone is the sense that things substantially exist independently of themselves in a permanent kind of way, in a continuous, substantial kind of way, or in a random kind of way, or in an independent, separate way. So a view of permanence or a view of immortality, for example, might now be gone. Shahako Kumara Roshi puts it very beautifully, I believe, in a book that he wrote called Living by Vow, which some of us studied last summer. And I quote, "Gone," this word gone, gatte, points to a reality beyond our system of values, beyond the boundary of our ready-made picture of the world and ourselves. Points to something beyond our ready-made picture of everything that we experience, including this body and mind. So, gone beyond, gone completely beyond, to a place that I've never been before, to a place that is free of delusion about separation, to a place that is free about delusion about self, to a place of being willing to fully experience the flux of the present moment and the interconnection that makes that possible. Gone to this very moment itself as a moment of an expression of the principles of reality blossoming, blossoming, blossoming. Gone beyond a limited view of the potential for a human life, of the capacity that is expressed as a human life. So that is awakening. That is the lived experience of the harmonious interconnection of these five skandhas with the reality that we live in. Sometimes it's evoked by sound, sometimes by thought, sometimes by a meditation without thought, sometimes by chanting. So the Heart Sutra is one of the most chanted teachings in Mahayana Buddhism. And in that form of practice, the body becomes literally an instrument of the Dharma. It's a very powerful practice. I really encourage you to consider chanting the Heart Sutra. It's profoundly liberating. Chanting makes an instrument out of us. It evokes and it also moves a certain energy, releases a certain kind of energy of practice, and opens the mind toward this teaching. Particularly if we're very mindfully chanting. And there are other ways to experience the sutras, no doubt. One of the ways that I experienced when I lived in Japan, the Heart Sutra is part of the New Year's morning ceremonies, and there's a ceremony in which we take the Dai Hanya, which is about 100 books, and it's the very, very long version of the Prajnaparamita Sutras. And we take the books and actually use them like accordions and actually open and close. I'll see if I can find a video and attach it to the class page. Open and close the books as a way of reading, quote unquote, the sutra without actually evoking the words, but physically moving them, physically encountering them. I talked to my Dharma brother Shoto about this one time. And I said, what's this about saying that we're reading the thing in this ceremony in which we are basically like shuffling these Japanese style books that are folded paper, accordion folded paper. And he said, well, you can't analyze it, you can't intellectualize it if you read it that way. So there are many different ways to consider how to practice with the sutra and practice with these teachings. And the mantra, as in terms of sound, is one of those ways. And then finally, this word svaha. Oh, before I go on to that, I did want to say something about, yes, okay, we'll get to Joshu in a minute. Svaha, the last word in the mantra. Gate, gate, para sangate, bodhi svaha. Yeah? So that's the last word of the sutra, this joyous energy. That is the bodhisattva's attitude in a single word. Yes. Yay. Yes. Taking up this incredible adventure of applying my whole life to the practice of awakening self and others, to the practice of really, really having a lived experience of emptiness. Joy. Yeah, right on. That's the last word of the sutra. And the Buddha himself, the historical Buddha Shakyamuni Buddha, gave many teachings about joy. Many, many teachings. In fact, you could say that one of the most pivotal moments for him, at least in the way that he described the process that he went through to awaken, to find a path to awakening, there was a moment in which he realizes that the harsh austerities that he has been practicing, this kind of very harsh ascetic practice that he has been working at for the last number of years, which is very much about control, whether it's control of the breath or control of food or control of the mind states. The Buddha realizes, oh, this kind of harshness is not going to resolve the problem of suffering. It's a little bit to the point that I was making at the end of the last lecture, which is if we take our good intentions to apply our life to awakening and then harm ourselves with that or create more difficulty for ourselves with that, then those are no longer good intentions, actually. And we need to be very thoughtful about that, not to use Buddhism as a way to create even more suffering in our lives. But back to joy. So the Buddha gave many teachings about joy, and he tells this story of this very pivotal moment when he realizes that harsh asceticism is not going to resolve the problem of dukkha, of fundamental dissatisfaction in a human life. And so he reflects, and he reflects on a moment when he was a boy, and he was sitting under a crabapple tree in one of the fields watching his father, and he had a moment of a very peaceful, wholesome, clear joy. And he reflects on that as later, as an adult, as a seeker, as an ascetic, and he says, why fear that kind of wholesome, clear, simple, pure joy. That can surely be helpful. That can surely be applied to the problem of suffering. So joy becomes one of the 7 factors of awakening, as the Buddha taught them. Joy becomes one of the 7 factors. And in fact, joy is understood oftentimes to generate a kind of energy and a kind of momentum in our practice that leads naturally on to awakening. It's said to really provide this kind of very strong momentum or forward movement in our practice. Once joy has arisen, it has this wonderful energy to it that actually makes it possible for us to apply an effortless kind of effort. And so that's another question for us to investigate. What is it that brings joy in my practice? What is it that brings joy in your practice? What is it that helps joy to arise for you in your practice? This is a very important question. It's not one to be set aside. At every stage of practice, we can experience joy. For me, I know that one of the things that's most helpful in terms of experiencing joy, particularly on the cushion, joy on the cushion, is relaxation. It's being able to find a sense of ease. Ease in the mind, ease in the body. A gentleness and an ease that allows me to set down the doer. And an ease and a relaxation and an openness and a gentleness in the body that allows for energy and for clarity to arise without struggle, without a kind of sense of driving. So there can be this kind of embodied awareness within release, within relaxation. So that's what works for me. I would invite you to find out for yourselves. Ask yourselves, what is it? What is it that brings joy in your practice? What helps you? Because often it takes time for joy to develop on the cushion. And so knowing the factors that help that, knowing what conditions we might be able to set in place to assist that in arising is very important. It's skillful means, again, skillful means in practice. Learning those things about ourselves and continuing to investigate them over time, over the years of practice, having a look again. Oh, what is it that brings joy? What is it that brings ease? What is it that makes happiness present more often on the cushion? And also thinking about the fact that that kind of surrender or that kind of relaxation or those conditions that make joy present can take time to develop, can take time to be discovered in this body and mind. And it may not come naturally to many of us. I know that for me, it took a very, very long time for that to develop in my sitting practice. For many folks, I think that it's hard to begin to develop a more frequent sense of focused, gentle ease and relaxation on the cushion. It took me a number of years. So you may have to apply some patience in your practice, and you may find your joy in other areas of practice off the cushion for some period of time. Either at the beginning, at the middle, toward the end. There can be many different fluctuations in our feeling tone as we're sitting or doing other sorts of practice. And so there may be times when you need to remind yourself about joy or help joy to arise in other aspects of your practice off the cushion as well. So things like being of service, enjoying being of service to the Sangha, to your fellow practitioners, developing Dharma friendships. This is really key. Buddha said, it's the whole of the spiritual life, right? Our Dharma friendships make the spiritual life possible for us. Those aha moments in enjoyment of little moments off the cushion of something clicking, something being realized, something becoming more clear suddenly. Finding joy in that, finding joy in the sights and the sounds and the smells of practice. In the smell of incense or the sound of the bell at the place where you most often meditate. So really, really discovering this wonderful, wonderful ingredient in practice, joy. And on that note, I also want to just mention briefly this koan that I offered on the class page from Zen Master Joshu, or Zhao Zhou is how his name would have been pronounced in the Chinese, I believe. And this quote is from the recorded sayings of Zen Master Joshu. And it goes like this, page 67. A monk said, "A clear-eyed person sees everything." A clear-eyed person sees everything. Then, do they see forms or not? Do they see forms or not? And Joshu said, they are smashed completely. And then the monk, the student, said, how are they smashed? And Joshu said, force is not used. Force is not used. So the student says, if force is not used, then how are they smashed? And finally, Joshu, Zen Master Joshu says, if force is used, then they have deviated. So just to unpack this just a little bit, a clear-eyed person sees everything. Someone who has dropped off all delusion, all greed and hatred. A clear-eyed person, someone who sees the true nature of things, whether momentarily or completely. Then, do they see forms or not? A clear-eyed person, do they see forms or not? So the student, in a way, is asking something about the nature of insight, is asking something about the nature of the reality that is experienced by someone who has seen how it really works, how things really are. Do they see forms or not? And so the teacher says, Zen Master Joshu says, they are smashed completely. And it's an interesting translation because I don't have the Chinese and I don't actually translate Chinese, so I don't really know. Does the they refer to the forms, or does the they refer to the one seeing the forms, the clear-eyed person? Or perhaps both. I mean, certainly Joshu was famous for many, many multiple layers of meaning in his engagements with his students. So they are smashed completely. The forms, person, the one who sees, the I leave it to you. In any event, the student asks, how are they smashed? And what does that mean anyway, that they are smashed completely? Think about the metaphor, some of the metaphors that I've offered in terms of seeing everything at the subatomic level or as like grains of sand. Smashed completely. Boundaries no longer discernible. So in response to how, Joshi says, force is not used. Force is not used. And that's why I bring this up at this point, speaking about joy in practice. Force is not used. Truly, truly, if ultimately the nature of insight requires the dropping off of the sense of self, then certainly the sense of a self that forces a certain kind of practice, that drives a certain kind of outcome, cannot be helpful, cannot be useful. Force doesn't work. The Buddha himself also acknowledged it, right? In that turning moment when he's decided to go from harsh asceticism to a practice of fostering joy, a joy that was beyond the kind of mundane joys that he's experienced before, but that helped to turn the mind and open the mind in a way that unlocked awakening. So the same is true for you. The same is true for me, for all of us. Force is not used, not to our benefit. So the student says, if force is not used, then how are they smashed? And Joshu basically goes back and says, not how they are smashed, but if force is used, then they have deviated. Deviated from what? From the path. From the path of awakening. From the path of being one who is clear-eyed and sees the nature of things. So in a way, he is answering the question indirectly. How are things smashed? By relinquishing the need to use force on ourselves, on each other. Force is not used in the process of awakening, in going beyond, completely beyond. So I hope that this class has been useful and supportive to your practice, that it has been informative and applicable to your everyday life. And I hope that you will take this opportunity of this life, whatever amount of it that you have left, to find your joy, to find the inspiration of your practice in the Heart Sutra.